Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today's topic is very fun for me to talk about. We're talking all about empaths and narcissists. So what I've done is I have created a list here just to make sure that I don't forget to touch on everything, but I want to discuss my own perspective on empaths and narcissists and the difference between them. I feel like there's a lot of cool things that we can learn from different personality types. And honestly, this has allowed me to bring compassion to both parties. I know that narcissists get a bad rap and a lot of people hate on them and say that they're terrible people. And the truth is that does not mean that they don't do terrible things. But I don't believe any person is evil or born a bad person, but the situations that happen to them in their environment, in their childhoods, things like that will affect the way that you live your life and the way that you are in your life. So with that being said, I wanted to touch on empaths first. And the way that I like to define someone who's an empath is someone who is a very highly sensitive individual, someone who can pick up on others' energies very easily. So for example, you walk into a room and you can very quickly pick up on the subtleties in the room. So whether other people are sad or angry or just being very observant of your environment. Someone who's a very big empath is someone who abandons themselves to either keep the peace or to make someone else feel better. This is something that I found is very, very common for empaths. They will do anything they can to make others feel better at their own detriment and their own expense. Like basically what you're doing is you're abandoning yourself for other people. And this is obviously a problem, not a good thing. So there are shadows and there are obviously good things to both being an empath and being a narcissist. Yes, there are positive things to being a narcissist, believe it or not. But that was the main thing I wanted to touch on when it comes to empaths. Another thing too is I wanted to mention kind of what happens in an empath's childhood. What creates an empath is someone who grows up and in their environment they have to be very careful of other people's emotions. Meaning that they had very maybe strict parents, people who would manipulate them or abuse them, and so the only way that the empath felt safe was to abandon themselves to make other people's needs, emotions, or wants above their own. And that was safety for them. Safety meant abandoning myself for other people. And the sad thing is they'll often attract people who are takers because the empath is so used to abandoning themselves and giving themselves up that it's the perfect match for a narcissist. And that's why you'll see a lot of empaths with narcissists, because it's a perfect match. The empath is the giver and the narcissist is the taker. Match made in heaven. Or not. So next I want to talk about the narcissist. So for me, the way that I see narcissists are people who have a very false, strong sense of self. And the reason why I say false is because what creates a narcissist is in early childhood, they were made to feel unworthy, unlovable, undeserving, basically something that has scarred them so deeply and made them feel so insecure that they were forced to create a false identity about themselves. Meaning, now instead of feeling those feelings in childhood, that they were unlovable, not deserving, unworthy, all that stuff, they were like, I cannot live with this amount of pain. I cannot even cope with this. So their protection mechanism is create a different sense of self. So instead of feeling that, I'm going to be confident. Everything's fine, I'm perfect, nothing's going wrong. So you'll notice with a lot of narcissistic people, they will completely avoid talking about themselves, especially in a deep way. They don't want to get deep with you. They don't even think that they're insecure. They will put up a front of being overly confident, but when you get to know them, you will know that they are the most insecure people ever. And it's because that is how they feel deep down but they're so afraid to look at their own shadows that they would rather be a completely different person. And another sad thing about this is basically lying to yourself so much that you believe that that's now who you are. And that's why I personally believe a lot of narcissists will not change, because they've lied to themselves so much that now they are whatever it is that they've been telling themselves for so long. That is why I personally have a lot of compassion for narcissists, because most people in that situation have gone through some very traumatic, hard situations in their past, and that has shaped them into who they are. Does that mean that you allow people to abuse you, to mistreat you? No. That means that you recognize when you spot a narcissist, understand why they're that way, have compassion for them, but maybe don't associate yourself with people like that, because chances are if you choose to be in a relationship like that, it's probably not going to end well. And of course, there are people on a spectrum. There's a spectrum of narcissism. You know, there's people who swing more toward even being like psychopath, and then there's people who are on the borderline. And the other thing that I want to mention is we all have a varying degree of narcissism within us. And I think that it's important for us to have this, because if we don't have a sense of self, then we would all die. If we didn't wake up in the morning and say, okay, I need to eat today, I need to, shower, I need to take care of myself, then eventually you're gonna die of starvation. So you have to have a sense of self. You have to have a degree of narcissism per se to keep yourself alive. Something else that I want to touch on is childhood traumas. The reason why I want to bring this up is because we are living out our default programming unless we choose to change the default programming. So if you look back in your life, notice the way that your parents were around you, notice the way that society was, all of these little things that happen during the first 7 years of your life are programming you to be a certain way. And unless you grow up and realize that you are programmed, that you have been brainwashed, either in a good way or a bad way, you will continue to live out those patterns of your ancestors, of your parents, unless you notice them, you're aware of them, and you choose to change them. And it doesn't mean that it's always a negative one. There are people who have a lot of positive things with their family, and those are blessings that are passed down and passed down. But then more times than not, they're negative things. There are things like poverty, there's things like lack of health, there's things like being very victimized and having a very lack-based consciousness around the way that we live our life. So the reason why I obviously talk about childhood a lot is because we need to look back in our life and see the things that we were brought up around, so that we are aware of the patterning within us, so that we can change those things if we so choose. And another thing with trauma is when kids are going through situations in their childhood that are very painful for them to go through, basically what happens is the child is forced to create meaning from that experience. When we're kids, going through trauma and pain like that is so much for us to deal with. It's literally too much for us to even survive, that we have to create coping mechanisms and ways to survive in our environment around either our parents, our caregivers, or whoever it is that's in our environment, because if we didn't, we probably would not survive. So it is strictly based on survival. But the thing is, when we grow up, and now that we are adults, we have the power to change those things. We don't have to live from survival anymore. We can choose to change those programs, to change the ways that we perceive our environment, and live from a state of love instead of a place of fear. But this requires a lot of healing. It requires a lot of self-awareness. It requires a lot of changing your perspective and being willing to uproot everything that you may have been taught. And that is why I actually made a video over on my Instagram about going through an identity crisis, because this happens often when people realize that their entire life they've been lied to. Very, very common. But if we don't take it personally, we just recognize that as something that may have happened, but let's choose to see it as something that has happened for me, and how can we grow from that? Now we become the person in the control position or the person in power. You're taking your power back instead of being victimized and saying, this happened to me, poor me. Because if you see it that way, it's gonna be that way. If you believe you can or you can't, you're right. There's a lot of power in that, and it has allowed me to profoundly change my life, and I believe that it can do the same for you. So I wanted to make this video, most importantly, to touch on the difference between empaths and narcissists. If you're interested in doing a one-on-one session with me, the information is in the description box below. I am taking on clients at the moment, and I would love to hear from you in the comments. I really appreciate if you would give me a thumbs up. It helps my channel out a lot, and I appreciate you guys so much for supporting my channel, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.